For our charcoal lesson today, I want you to start by taking your black paper and holding it horizontal, so that is not up and down, but kind of side to side way. And then I want you to split it into 4 sections, 4 big sections. You're going to need, beyond the black paper, your white charcoal pencil and some other sort of eraser. I'm just going to use the end of a number 2 pencil as my eraser, but if you have your eraser from your packet, then that works too. So in our first section up here, let's just put a little number 1 to help us stay organized, and then a number 2, a number 3 as we come down, and a number 4. So in our first section, we are going to do 2 rectangles, and again, they do not need to be exactly the same, but try to use up most of the space in that section. I bet this is reminding you of something we did last week. We're going to take this, and this time we're only going to split it into 4 sections because it's so much smaller. So that means 3 lines. And do that to each of them. Now that we have 4 sections, we're going to label them 5, 4, 3. Oops, there's only 4 of them. 4, 3, 2, and 1. So 4 is going to be our darkest, and 1 is going to be our lightest. So now we're actually going to work a little bit backwards from what we did last time, where if we want our lightest one to be white, we're going to have to color it in the darkest with our white pencil. So go ahead and do that. And again, try to use the side of your pencil, not up and down, but like pinch it, hold it to the side. Use the side of that charcoal pencil to get a good value gradient going. I want it to be really, really white. And depending on if you have a charcoal pencil or a colored pencil, you can rub it a little bit with your finger to kind of blend it in. You might need to have a tissue if you're doing that a lot. I'm going to come on to number 2 now, and I want it to be a little bit lighter, right? We're moving towards darkness. So, excuse me, I want it to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to go with a little bit less pressure. Trying to keep consistent pressure throughout that square. Okay, I'm going to blend that in a little bit. And then I'm going to go to the 3, and I want it to be a little bit darker, so less light. So less pressure in that square. And then I'm going to go to the 4 and just the tiniest bit. Should be the darkest section I have. And I'll blend in those last 2. And there I have a nice value scale from darkest to lightest. I'm going to do the same thing in the bottom one, but I'm going to use my hatching techniques. So remember, if we want something to, in this case, be the lightest, I'm going to do my hatches as close together as I can get them. Trying to keep them consistent. You might find that you need to sharpen your pencil at some point. I had a little bit inconsistent lines there because I was using the side, and then I moved to using more of the top. You can see the differences. Try to keep it 1 throughout. And keep those hatches as close as you can to make this as light as possible. So we're obviously doing cross hatching in this one. It's pretty light. I'm going to move on to the next one and move those hatches a little bit further apart. Trying to keep them about equal distance from each other. I might even add like a 3rd layer here. So lighter, darker than the one before, but still has a lot of white value in it. Then we'll move our value gradient into a darker one. So I'm going to spread them even further apart. and the darkest one, so the least hatching. You can, if you'd like to, even try a little bit of blending. I would do it really lightly, just to kind of see what happens. Get a feel for what it's like to blend with these, if you like that or not. In some cases you might want to use that, and in some cases you might not. I want you to blow this just to make like a couple marks. Do some really hard marks. Maybe do a little bit of a blend. And then do a couple little softer marks. And then I want you to use your eraser. And I want you to see, can you erase these marks? What happens when you erase them? Do they fully go away? Do they not? So kind of experiment a little bit with the eraser. And with this, can you make like a line through them? Depending on how nice of a fine point you have with your eraser, could you kind of, make a straight line go through something? Just kind of get the hang of like, how much does it erase? How fully could you erase some of these white marks? So again, the goal today is just exploring with this charcoal pencil and with the eraser into how we kind of can create these values and create some form as well. For our next section, we're going to go to section 2, and we're going to do a cylinder here. A cylinder is like a can. So I'm actually going to do a can kind of on its side. It will eventually look similar to this one. So I'm going to start just by doing a round circle. So this is going to be a two-dimensional circle, not super, super big, but over here on the side. And then my form is going to come out from it. So you want to have enough, over on the right-hand side, enough that you can build to the left of it. And there's a bunch of different ways to do a circle. I kind of usually practice a couple times with my hand, just like this, and then I kind of just do it and see how it goes. You can always fix it later. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Just get a good enough circle there. Okay, that'll just be sort of your base. And then moving out from that, I'm going to kind of work in a diagonal. So doing a diagonal line, moving up towards the kind of left corner there. And the same thing from the top here. I'm going to start right about at the top of that and do kind of a diagonal line. And I want these lines to be parallel. So they're about the same width apart the whole way. Okay. And then I will finish this with a curve, and this curve should kind of match the curve of my circle here. So as best as I can, and I can always fix it later, so don't worry about it if it's not perfect. But kind of sketch in. I'm doing this pretty lightly with my charcoal pencil, so that if I make any mistakes, I can erase, and I can come back and kind of clean them up later. Okay, so we're going to imagine that our light is coming from the top and also from this side. Okay, so if it's coming right at this side of the can, then this is going to be incredibly light. So I almost want to use like a level 1 value on this. So I'm just going to kind of shade all of this in my circle here. And this is a good chance to kind of clean up that circle if you need to, those edges, make them nice and neat. And I'm just going to do a level 1 value, so as light as I can make it. You could hatch this if you wanted to. You could cross hatch it. I'm just choosing to do a shading blend. For now. Okay, that's pretty good. I'll probably go through and just kind of blend it in a little bit to get any of those little spots that I missed. But we're ready for the next step. So the next step is thinking of the top. This is where the other place that my light is going to be coming from. So I would want to have this line be as light as possible. So I'm just going to make this into kind of a nice firm line. And one thing that's going to help define this lightness from the lightness coming here is to keep a little bit of black in between them. And this can be kind of tricky to do, but I'm going to very carefully just kind of keep a little bit of black. If you have a really nice eraser, you can go back through and kind of clean that up a little bit. I do not have a really nice eraser, so I might not be able to do that. But for right now, I'm just going to do a little section like that because I'm not quite sure how far I want to keep my lightness coming down, like my lightest value. I know I don't want it to go all the way down, so I'm not going to make a bright white line coming all the way down. You could, but you would just have to erase it later. So in this section, kind of right here at the top, I'm going to shade this in with the lightest value, a value of 1 as well. I'm going to have this come, you know, about the same over in here as well. So I'm starting really nice and pressing firmly here, getting the lightest value I can, and then as I'm moving down, I'm going to kind of be pressing a little bit lighter as I go. So I'm starting to kind of even into here, pressing a little bit lighter. Kind of depends on where you want, you know, to show that your light is starting to fade out. But definitely, once you get to about the midway point, you want to have that light, you know, being a little bit darker and darker and darker. So darker value as I'm moving down. And I'll kind of try to keep this going all the way across. So I'm pressing a little bit lighter. I'm trying to keep those be kind of consistent across my cylinder. You can kind of rub that in. All right, so now as I get towards the bottom, I am going to leave kind of a section here that is like pretty dark. So I might just add a tiny bit of more blend here. And it doesn't have to be like perfectly even line either. It's okay if it's like a little bit messier than that. I had some white on my finger, so you should avoid that too. I just rubbed a bunch of white on there. If you have a tissue, you can usually wipe it off. This would be a good example too of what you can do with your eraser. If I got a little bit too much in there and I want to clean it up, I just really gently go in with my eraser to clean that. I'm going to kind of do just a little bit of white here at the bottom. And this will kind of show the difference between what it's lying on, like the table, and the bottom of the can. And I'm going to do just the tiniest bit here just to kind of show where the bottom of that can is. And I'm not doing a lot, but I'm doing it pretty light and then kind of just easing it off. So it's like a little miniature value gradient in a tiny space. It also lets me kind of edge along that back side too, and I can kind of clean up those lines as I go. Kind of blend that a little bit. And now I'm going to keep going. Just cleaning up some of those edges really quick. So I can see, I feel like I started a little bit too low here. See how this is like, my white spot here is almost too low. So I'm just going to kind of clean up that edge. And that's the beauty of the erasers, that you really can kind of change as you go and change your form almost a little bit. Let's see. That's a little bit better. Now I'm going to work on just sort of like, what would it be sitting on? Where would the shadow be? Remember, the shadow is actually going to be the darkest. So if I had a shadow for this, just kind of lightly sketch something in. Remember, the light is coming from here, so my shadow is going to be kind of here on the ground, okay? And I'm going to have it, I'm just going to kind of very lightly outline sort of where this kind of shadow would go. And I'm going to leave all that part dark then. So the next thing I'm going to do then is like add some texture. I might do some hatching instead, and I'm gonna leave just a tiny bit, just like I did on this edge, to kind of differentiate between the sphere, or the circle part here of my cylinder, and the table. I'll leave a little bit of like a black kind of like line there, so you can kind of see the difference between where that part of the cylinder is and where the table is. And then I can kind of, I'm just going to hatch in for this. We'll try something different. So why don't you try some hatching too if you did blending on the rest of it. And you want this part to be, nice and light. Just kind of get a feel for what would it be like to add just some texture to this, and kind of ease up on your value as you're going out. And then I'll do this all around my shadow here too. So I'm creating kind of a just a texture to show that table. And kind of practicing a little bit of that value in there as well. So there you have a cylinder with some good shading. All right, for our next space, we're going to try to do a sphere. So remember, a sphere is a 3D object. It has form. That's the element of art. It is a circle if it's 2D, but when you start to add that shading and that value, it adds form, and that creates it as a sphere. So we're going to start with just a nice large circle here. Okay, and just like we did up above in step 2, it doesn't need to be perfect. Just kind of sketch in a circle. You can always clean it up with your eraser later. You do want to leave a little bit of space on both the sides to do a shadow, on one of them at least. All right, so I'm gonna have my light this time coming from this direction, and that means that that is going to be the brightest value. So the lightest value, in this case, our level 1. And I'm gonna start with just kind of creating a spot there. Often we call this a highlight. It's gonna be like the brightest spot of an object. You'll see this in like anime when they have little eyes, and there's like just a tiny little, like mark like that. That's a highlight to show kind of where the light is bouncing off of an object. So this is going to be the brightest spot of my object. And as I move from here, I'm going to keep it pretty bright, but I want to be kind of moving in this curved direction. It's almost like a little smile. And as I go down, I'm keeping that curve almost even more pronounced. So when you get to the bottom, you almost have this like little sliver of a moon left up kind of towards into the middle. Okay. You don't want to be doing this flat, like sideways, diagonal like this, because that, if you do it like this, you don't get any form that way. It looks like a flat object. So instead, as I am highlighting and adding that light value, I'm going to be moving kind of in this curved path. So obviously I want the lightest part to stay up towards my light source. And then as I'm moving down, I'm going to get a little bit less pressure so that I'm moving to a darker value. And I'm doing like a little bit of a combination here of kind of like hatching and blending, and that's totally fine to do and to kind of explore what works best for you and what you like. But again, I'm keeping it in that kind of smiling, smiley face shape. I'm getting it even almost like more and more pronounced as I go down. So by the end, it's going to be really, really light down here, but I want it to be really like kind of this sort of half moon shape at the end. I'm going to kind of start there and work backwards almost a little bit to add a little bit more shadow up into, or a little bit more light up into here. It takes a little practice to get used to like working the opposite way than we're used to with our adding shadows versus adding light. Even as I'm blending, I'm kind of blending in that half circle motion. If I feel like I got like that place is a little bit too light, I can kind of go in here with my pencil too and just sort of almost like hatch away a little bit of that highlight to make it a little bit of a darker value. So you can kind of go in with your eraser too and add a little bit of texture or some of that darkness if you went overboard like I did a little bit. And that's a good way to try to use it as well. So I'm feeling okay about that shading. I'm gonna kind of move on to like adding a shadow now, or building in where a shadow would be. And I'm gonna do the same strategy I did with the cylinder, kind of adding a little bit of that lightness down at the bottom just to sort of show where the opposite end of the light would be coming from. And then I'll sort of build in my shadow here. So I think I'm just gonna kind of draw, this is like I call this a horizon line. So this is sort of the table that my sphere would be sitting on, or the surface that my sphere would be sitting on. And that'll kind of help me see a little bit more of my shadow. So here I've just kind of sketched in about where I want my shadow to be. And I'm going to keep that part dark, right? So the rest of it though, I'm going to try to do sort of similar to my sphere where I keep that line of black there just to differentiate from the edge of the object to the edge of the table. And for this one, I think I'll do the kind of the opposite here. I did it brighter and then moved away into darkness. Here, maybe I'll try to do it sort of a little bit lighter and then move into brighter as I move away from my object. And again, I'm going to try kind of a mix of like blending and hatching here. So I'm going to keep it really light when I'm close to my object. Just trying to kind of create a defined line there right next to it. Now you're just going in and kind of adding texture or shading to what would be your like table area. Adding a little bit more light here since my light is coming from this direction. This part would probably be a little bit brighter. And then as we moved back, it would get a little bit lighter and lighter. For my final box, my fourth box, I'm actually going to split it in half one more time. I can label this one box 5. We're going to come back to box 4. We're going to start on box 5 for right now. And we're going to work with negative space. So negative space is the object or the space that is like in the background or surrounding the object of interest. So if I was talking about the negative space of the sphere, instead of shading in the sphere like this, we would have shaded everything around it, and then the sphere would have just stayed dark. That would have been like the object of our interest. And we are coloring in like the negative space, the extra space behind it. We're going to do a stool. It'll be relatively simple. We're going to start with just kind of a rectangle here towards the top. And then as we move, you can see I already did this. I thought I was recording and I wasn't. So I erased it to do it again. But as I move, I'm going to make 4 legs. I'm just going to kind of come down in a diagonal for both of them, almost like I'm making a letter A. And then I am going to kind of create the actual leg. So here's where that leg would go, and then the top of the stool would be a horizontal line up here. And same thing on this side, a horizontal line with kind of the edge of that stool right there. So there's a leg and there's a leg. And then I'm going to create another leg here. So I come down. Kind of outline both of those. I'm trying to keep those lines parallel to each other so they look about the same thickness all the way down. And so now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 legs. I'm going to close those up. And this would be like this is going to be my negative space back in here. Just going to add a little bit of shading just to help me see it, so I can kind of see those legs where they're black a little bit easier. I'm going to kind of try to keep the same thickness of this leg the whole way down. So I'm going to come over here on the side and make that line. And then make another horizontal line across. This will be like the middle bar where you kind of put your feet. And bring another line down to make this leg. Try to have these lines match up. And coming across horizontally. Okay, that's pretty good. You can kind of see the stool starting to take shape a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the shading around the back and the inside. This kind of makes my negative space object stand out a little bit. So I'm going to just sort of shade in these. I'm going to practice some of that value, that dark to light value, light to dark value inside these. And these are definitely smaller spaces, so you have to be a little bit more careful. But I'm just going to go through and shade all these spaces in carefully. So now that I've done those inside spaces, I'm going to go around and shade the outside. And I think I'm going to leave it like, it'll be the darkest near the stool and kind of moving brighter or, you know, lighter as we get away from the stool. So I'm going to shade really lightly close to the stool. And about the same, you know, space kind of around the stool. And then now you have a object drawn with using negative space and positive space. So for this last square, I just want you to split it into 3 different sections. And we're just going to work on doing patterns and textures in this section. So for one of them, I just want you to pick any pattern you want to try and create a pattern in this section. And look at the example handout to kind of help you if you need to have help picking out a pattern. For this next one, I want us to try some texture like fur. So look at the, there's like a lion or a, I don't know, a cheetah that I'm putting as an example, and kind of look at that. The way I'll show you my practices, often with the texture of the fur, I did a lot of like long hatches and brighter value, lighter value, closer to kind of the lines, and then I tried to create like some lines in between. But really, I just want you to be playing kind of with this texture. How would you create fur as a texture? And then for your last one, you can do any texture that you want. So you could, or just try to draw anything you want with your pencil. So it could be a pattern, it could be another texture. You could try to draw, you know, the branch of a tree. How would you create texture on that? But pattern for one. Try to make a fur texture here. Remember, texture is the way that something feels. And we're doing implied texture, so it doesn't actually feel furry. It feels smooth like a paper, but we're implying that that would feel like fur, that it would be fur. And then for your last one, another texture or another pattern that you just want to try and explore. Or pattern.